In the heart of a small town in Oregon, nestled between a dusty bookstore and a bustling cafe, stood a quaint little shop with weathered wooden panels and a faded sign that read, Harper's Curiosities. The shop was run by Mr. Edward Harper, an elderly man with a kind face framed by silver hair and sharp, observant eyes. Though his movements were slow, his mind was as agile as ever, and he knew every item in his store as if they were old friends. Despite his years, he had a quiet dignity that drew respect from those who truly paid attention. Yet, not everyone saw him that way. A group of local teenagers had made a habit of mocking Mr. Harper. They would gather outside his store during lunch breaks, pointing and laughing at his old-fashioned clothes or the careful way he dusted the shelves. "Look at him, like he's from a museum," one would whisper, and the others would snicker. They thought he was an easy target, a relic of the past who couldn't possibly understand the world of smartphones and social media. One crisp autumn afternoon, the group of teens pushed open the door of Harper's shop with exaggerated bravado, the small bell above the entrance ringing sharply. "Hey, Grandpa Harper," one shouted, grinning, "still counting your pennies?" They laughed uproariously, expecting him to respond with embarrassment or confusion. But Mr. Harper did not react the way they had hoped. Instead, he looked at them over his round spectacles and smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. His hands, though aged and spotted with liver marks, rested calmly on the counter. He had seen this behavior many times before, and while the laughter of youth was natural, so was the lesson they were about to learn. "You boys are quite lively today," he said softly, his voice calm but carrying an unspoken weight. "Tell me, what brings you into my little corner of curiosities this time?" The teens exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Their laughter faltered slightly under the old man's steady gaze. He didn't seem offended or fearful, he seemed ready. We were just, checking out your store," one of the boys stammered, trying to sound casual, though the mockery still lingered in his tone. Mr. Harper nodded, then leaned over the counter and picked up a small, intricately carved wooden box. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. The teens shrugged, smirking. "It's a puzzle box from the early 1900s. Only a few people in the world know how to open it without forcing it." He set it down in front of them, his hands steady. "Perhaps you'd like to try." The group of teens burst into laughter, certain they could outsmart this frail old man. They had no idea that Mr. Harper's patience and knowledge would soon make them regret underestimating him. For a brief moment, the small shop, with its warm wooden shelves and faint scent of old books and cedar, became the stage for a lesson that the teens would never forget, one that would begin with laughter but end in humility. The next day, the group of teenagers returned to Harper's Curiosities, convinced they could outsmart the elderly shop owner this time. They strutted in through the creaky door, the small bell chiming as if announcing their arrival. "He won't see us coming today," one whispered, grinning. Their laughter, though quieter than yesterday, still echoed through the small shop. Mr. Harper was behind the counter, polishing a set of antique brass scales, and he looked up with a welcoming smile that made the teens uneasy. "Good afternoon, boys," he said warmly. "Back again so soon?" One of them, a tall boy with tousled hair, snorted. "Yeah, we thought we'd check if your puzzles and old coins are as boring as your stories," he said, attempting to sound casual but failing. The other teens snickered nervously. Mr. Harper replied thoughtfully, "Perhaps it's time for a little challenge then." He gestured for them to gather around a large, glass display case filled with rare coins from around the world. These coins are from different centuries, each with its own history and value. If you can guess the correct value of even a few of them, I'll consider it a fair game. The teens, confident in their knowledge, or rather, their overconfidence, laughed again. "This will be easy," one said, patting his pockets. "How hard can it be?" Mr. Harper placed a small, silver coin in front of them. "This coin is from 1876, minted in Philadelphia. Can any of you tell me its value?" The teens looked at the coin, squinting as if its answer were hidden in the intricate design. They whispered to each other, throwing out guesses that were wildly off, some too low, some absurdly high. Mr. Harper corrected each one calmly, explaining the history behind each coin, the metal composition, and the rarity. As the challenge continued, the boys' initial laughter began to fade. They realized they didn't know as much as they thought. Each mistake, each failed guess, chipped away at their arrogance. Mr. Harper's quiet, methodical explanations illuminated how little they truly understood about patience, research, and respect for knowledge. By the time they reached the last coin, a small, bronze token from the early 1800s, the teens were noticeably uneasy. They looked around at the shelves lined with curiosities, ancient books, delicate music boxes, and artifacts that seemed to whisper stories from the past. They were no longer mocking the old man, instead, they were trying to absorb what little they could. Finally, Mr. Harper leaned back in his chair and smiled. Sometimes, he said softly, we think knowledge is about what we already know, but it is really about how willing we are to learn. The teens exchanged glances, a mix of embarrassment and realization spreading across their faces. They had come in thinking they could ridicule and intimidate, but instead, they had been quietly outsmarted by patience and wisdom. The lesson was subtle yet profound. Arrogance and mockery may seem fun for a moment, but humility and curiosity always carry more value. For the first time, the teenagers truly understood that Mr. Harper's strength wasn't in his age or his shop, it was in his mind and his character. The atmosphere in Harper's Curiosities had changed. The teens, who had entered the shop brimming with arrogance and laughter, now stood quietly, their confidence replaced by unease. Mr. Harper, sensing their growing discomfort, set the last coin down gently on the counter. It was a small, bronze token from the early 1800s, worn smooth from centuries of handling. This one, he said softly, is the rarest of them all. Its story is more valuable than its metal. The boys leaned in, curiosity replacing their previous mockery. What's so special about it? One finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Harper's eyes twinkled. It belonged to a young apprentice who traveled across the United States, learning from different masters. He worked hard, studied patiently, and treated everyone he met with respect. Because of his humility, he became renowned in his craft. This token reminds us that knowledge and kindness are more precious than wealth or mockery. The teens swallowed, realizing how small their behavior had been in comparison. The old man continued, his voice firm but gentle. You came in yesterday laughing at me, thinking I was slow, thinking my ways were outdated. Today, I showed you that patience, attention to detail, and respect for learning are far more powerful than mocking someone. One of the boys, the tallest of the group, shifted uncomfortably. We didn't mean to, we just thought it would be funny, he muttered. Mr. Harper nodded slowly. Apologies are words, he said, but actions define us. If you truly understand this lesson, you'll carry it into how you treat others, from your classmates to strangers you meet in the streets. He paused, letting the words settle. The quiet in the shop felt almost sacred, the kind of stillness that only comes with genuine realization. Finally, he gestured toward the door. I think it's time for you to leave, he said. The teens hesitated, unsure if they were being dismissed or if there was more to the lesson. Leave now, reflect on what you've learned, and return only when you carry respect with you, not laughter at someone else's expense. One by one, the boys shuffled toward the exit, their heads bowed. They didn't push each other, didn't laugh, didn't joke, they simply left, carrying with them a weight they hadn't expected. The bell above the door chimed softly as it closed, marking the end of their intrusion and the beginning of their understanding. Mr. Harper straightened the display case and returned to his polishing, a faint smile playing at his lips. It wasn't triumph or revenge that pleased him, it was the quiet hope that knowledge, patience, and humility could still influence even the most thoughtless hearts. Outside, the teens walked in silence down the main street of the town, the crisp air filling their lungs as they processed the day's events. The arrogance that had driven them yesterday had been replaced by self-awareness. Though they didn't speak, each boy carried the lesson in his own way, that wisdom often comes quietly, disguised in patience, and that laughter at another's expense can lead only to regret. By the time they reached the corner where they would normally joke and boast, not a word was spoken. And for the first time, they understood that respect, earned or given, was far more powerful than ridicule. Days passed, and the story of the incident at Harper's Curiosities quietly spread through the small Oregon town. People spoke not just of the old man's age or the quaint charm of his shop, but of his remarkable wisdom. Parents shared the story with their children, neighbors nodded appreciatively when passing by the wooden storefront, and even local teachers referenced it as an example of humility and respect. Mr. Harper's reputation grew, not for his antiques, rare coins, or curiosities, but for the subtle, unforgettable lesson he had imparted to a group of reckless teens. The four boys who had mocked him were no exception. Though they had initially thought the episode would fade into a story to laugh about, it lingered in their minds instead. Each one reflected on the events quietly, replaying Mr. Harper's calm demeanor, his careful explanations, and the gentle yet firm way he had guided them toward understanding. They realized that the old man's power was not in force or anger but in his knowledge and patience, qualities they had overlooked entirely. Over the following weeks, their behavior began to shift. At school, they no longer mocked their classmates or dismissed older teachers' advice. Instead, they listened more, asked thoughtful questions, and even admitted when they didn't know something. The lesson from the shop had sunk deep. Respect and humility were stronger than pride or mockery. On weekends, they would sometimes wander past Harper's shop, hesitating outside the wooden door, imagining what rare coin or hidden story might be waiting inside. Meanwhile, the shop itself became a hub of curiosity and admiration. Visitors from nearby towns would arrive, hoping to meet the wise shopkeeper they had heard so much about. Mr. Harper welcomed them with the same calm patience he had shown the teens, sharing stories of his curiosities and explaining the histories behind his rare items. Children and adults alike would marvel at the coins, music boxes, and old books, all while learning lessons about patience, diligence, and respect. One crisp morning, the 4 teens returned, not to mock or laugh, but to sincerely apologize. They stood awkwardly in the doorway, hands in pockets, faces serious. Mr. Harper, the tallest said, "We wanted to say, thank you. Not just for letting us play the coin game, but for showing us how wrong we were." Mr. Harper smiled gently, a warmth in his eyes. "Actions speak louder than words," he said softly. "Carry this lesson with you, and it will serve you better than any coin or curiosity in this shop." As they left, heads held a little higher, they felt a quiet pride, not in arrogance but in growth. And Harper's curiosities returned to its peaceful rhythm, the shopkeeper continuing his daily routine, polishing shelves, dusting coins, and welcoming every visitor with the same patience and care that had changed 4 lives forever. The story became a part of the town's lore, a gentle reminder that wisdom could quietly conquer pride, and that sometimes the smallest, calmest voices carried the strongest lessons. And in the warm glow of the shop's wooden interior, Mr. Harper remained the heart of it all, proof that respect, knowledge, and patience could shape not only a shop but an entire community.